Okay, I believe we are live. Is that correct? Thank you, everybody, for coming. I am both honored and pleased to have four superb experts in both genocide and trans history, and I'll be introducing each of them. But for right now, I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Here we go. So this is what we're all here for. The question is, Transamerica, is genocide likely? And if so, when? And what are my options? The evening is going to go on a schedule, which you can see right here. Just very briefly, here are the introductions. The panelists will each have 3 minutes to describe what their organization is and why it's important to them, and just make any kind of opening comments that they like. And then we'll get on to the first question. Excuse me. Yes, that's right. We'll get on to the first question, which is this a genocide? Because regardless of how it feels individually, there are historical precedents, for which I'm very glad that we have the representatives from Lemkin Institute and Dr. Henry Theriault. Then there will be some time for questions and discussion before we go on to the second question is, well, what can we do about it as individuals to protect ourselves? Again, questions and discussions, and then we have a bit of time left over in case we have any kind of overrun. And here's all of the information. Well, I guess you're all in Twitch already, so there's no reason to have to go to that QR code. I'd like to start, as I say, just by introducing the four people who are taking part as a panel. The first is Dr. Henry Theriault, and just for the record, I'll read out his introduction, with the note that you'll see at the bottom that the views that Dr. Theriault expresses are his individual scholarly views and don't represent an official position of the Worcester State University, where he is now employed. But Dr. Henry Theriault has served 2 terms as president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, or IAGS. He's the founding co-editor of the journal Genocide Studies International and co-edited IAGS's Genocide Studies and Prevention 2007 to 2012. He's now the associate provost at Worcester State University in Massachusetts after having been a professor in its philosophy department, which he also chaired for 6 years. His work researches genocide denial, genocide prevention, post-genocide victim-perpetrator relations, reparations, and mass violence against women and girls. He's lectured around the world and is lead author of the Armenian Genocide Reparations Study Group's 2015 final report and co-author of the United Nations Genocide Convention, An Introduction. Moving on, we have Dr. Susan Stryker. Historian Susan Stryker is a Lambda Literary Award-winning author and Emmy Award-winning filmmaker whose work focuses on transgender communities and identities. She's the Professor Emerita of Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Arizona, currently holds a distinguished non-teaching appointment at Stanford University's Michelle R. Clayman Institute for Gender Research, and has been a visiting faculty member at Harvard University, Yale University, and others. Susan helped found numerous LGBT-related institutions, including the journal TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly, and the American LGBTQ+ Museum in New York. She is the recipient of the David Kessler Award in 2009 and the Michael Bruckner Prize in 2015 for career accomplishment in LGBT studies. Elisa von Joeden-Forgey is the co-founder and executive director of the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention in the United States, and that's at lemkininstitute.com. She's formerly the endowed chair in Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College in New Hampshire, and a professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Stockton University in New Jersey, where she started the Genocide Prevention Certificate Program. She's an expert in the study of genocide, focusing especially on gender, prevention, and the history of colonialism. Finally, we have our own Anne Ogborn, who is the chair of Trans Rescue, the organization that is putting on this webinar. Anne Ogborn has been an activist for trans issues since the 80s, starting with the Kansas City Human Rights Ordinance Project, local community formation work, and prison support initiatives. In the 90s, she organized the first Michigan Women's Music Festival protest and was one of the founders of Transgender Nation, Queer Nation San Francisco's transgender focus group. Ogborn was an early participant and organizer of the New Women's Conference, a retreat for transsexual women. She edited its newsletter, Rites of Passage, which would later become the Transsexual News Telegraph. And my name is Tom Geller. I work in communications. I'm a recent volunteer for Trans Rescue and by far the least important person in this room. So I'm mostly going to just sit back and let everybody have the conversation that I think we all want to have. So having said all of that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to say whatever they'd like to, by way of their own introduction about their organization and so forth. And by the way, I've put this in pretty much random order, and I think I'd like to start with you, Anne, as the chair and co-founder of Trans Rescue.
Thank you, Tom. So Trans Rescue's mission is to assist transgender, intersex, and more broadly queer people to flee from places where it's dangerous to be trans. And we will do that anywhere in the world. That includes the United States. We divide the world into three categories. Those countries which are obviously dangerous, those countries which we consider safe, and those countries which we call countries of new concern, countries that were once proceeding towards transgender rights. And of course, there is nowhere in the world where a trans person is not subject to some discrimination and where it is not, in some respects, dangerous to be trans. But these countries are places where it was once safer and where it's now becoming more dangerous. And they worry us greatly because, for example, personally, I'm an American citizen. U.S. government issued me once a male passport. My current passport says I am female. That makes it very easy for the government to know that I am trans. Figuring out that I am trans requires a moment's search on Google. If you are in Uganda and you are trans, you know that it is dangerous and you know that that's information you have to marshal and control. So in many respects, being trans in the US can be, should things turn dangerous, it could become a very serious situation very rapidly for the vaguely 2 million trans people who are in the US.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I had myself on mute. That was a good amount of time. Thank you. Next up, we have Elisa von Joeden-Forgey. If you could introduce yourself, thank you.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm Elisa von Joeden-Forgey, and I'm very happy to be here. It's an honor to be here today. And I represent the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention, which was founded in 2017, originally as the Iraq Project for Genocide Prevention as a consequence of travels to northern Iraq. And the experiences that I and the colleague with whom I founded Lemkin Institute had there, particularly the massive gaps we saw in genocide prevention mechanisms and protocols around the world, especially when it came to the global grassroots and the persons really victimized and targeted by genocide. So the Lemkin Institute exists to build bridges between threatened communities and to create a global language of genocide prevention that is shared between peoples around the world, including between elite genocide prevention specialists, right, and the global grassroots that have the most to lose within genocidal processes. The Lemkin Institute has gone on record as saying that we are squarely already within a genocidal process in the United States. Our position is that genocide legally, right, is a crime of intent. And when intent exercises power, whether it's through a state or a non-state actor, then we are in a genocidal process. Genocide's not just about killing. We have identified 10 different patterns of genocide historically, using the works largely of Raphael Lemkin, after whom we are named, in order to honor him. And the current genocide against trans people, or the ongoing genocidal process against trans people in the United States, falls currently into category 9, which is denial of identity, which is in fact a very common form of genocide, or a common period within larger genocidal processes. For trans people, mass killing may not ever be, God willing, the main mode of identity destruction. And instead, what we may see is genocide through the withdrawal of access to necessary gender-affirming healthcare, right? And the full criminalization of identity, which we are seeing now in things like the recent bathroom bill in Idaho. The Lemkin Institute has officially identified the so-called gender critical movement as a genocidal movement with a genocidal ideology. We did this back in November 2022 in a statement. And things have just sped up, of course, since then. Since Trump started his second term, we've released 3 red flag alerts for genocide for the trans community in the United States. Our most recent was from 11 March, where we noted in particular the intensification and radicalization of anti-trans ideology and policy in the United States, as well as the sort of discursive creation of a cosmic enemy. And for us, that is one of the strongest red flags of genocidal intent, is the creation of a cosmic enemy. That is an enemy that by its very existence somehow challenges the strength and the future of the self, right? And so the self being the Trump administration, but also, as they say, the United States of America. So trans people are seen as cosmic enemies to the strength of the United States of America. The next stage after a red flag alert, we release red flag alerts when we see immediate developments that have the potential to radicalize and or bring together destructive historical trajectories and move a society further towards mass atrocity. So we feel like we're sort of in that red flag zone. But the next step after that for the Lemkin Institute is something we call active genocide alerts, where developments show a clear genocide in process that for us generally involves some very strong state level persecution. And this means that there's coordination, right, at the top level of a leadership of a state or a non-state actor. We would probably release an AGA. We discuss this all the time, but we would probably release an active genocide alert if or when the federal government bans gender-affirming care nationwide for all trans people, child and adult, in the United States. And the Trump administration has made it clear that that is where they want to go. All of this, I want to say just to start, does not mean that there are not options. It does not mean that there are not ways to protect oneself and one's loved ones. But for the Lemkin Institute, we feel we're already in a genocidal process.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving up next is Dr. Henry Theriault.
Thank you so much. And first, let me thank Trans Rescue not only for organizing tonight's program, but also for all the work that you're doing in a not just the current period, but in periods past, where, as you said, Anne, it's always a crisis. Trans people have long been subjected to violence and threat and hate and destruction. So your work is crucial, and I think anyone that knows of your work is well aware of that. I have to say the other thing is it's an honor to be with everybody. Tom, Elisa, whom I've known for many years, and Susan. And I have to tell you, Professor Stryker, when I had circulated the flyer to my campus, the head of our LGBTQ LGBTQIA plus institute said, "Oh my God, you know Susan Stryker." It was like the biggest thing. So it's really an honor to have met you through this process and to be here. I'm just going to say I take a little bit of a different view from the norm in how genocides happen or why they happen. And I think this is the escalation to systematic and systemic mass violence against trans people that we can see in the United States today. And we'll get to that. You know, is it a genocide? Is it not? Or is that the question to be asking? But I think that oftentimes we think that the more effectively we dehumanize and marginalize a population, the more we're on a trajectory towards genocide. And I would actually argue that in this case and many others, it's actually the opposite. As long as trans people had been invisibilized in US law, politics, culture, and so forth, or demonized or excluded as an obvious other that couldn't be considered part of the us, of the core identity of Americans, there was a sense of, I won't say safety, but there was a sense of static hierarchy that was sustainable over time. It was enforced by violence, by local level, individual level prejudice, and so forth on a continuing basis. But it didn't rise to the level of raising fundamental questions about our society. And I think if you look at the success of the trans movement and the ally movements and other ways of problematizing gender over the past couple decades, not to blame people for doing this, but as people have recognized generally that our views need to shift, that is, the dominant ideological views in the US need to shift, that they're inconsistent with basic human values, human rights, and so on, the more that we see a need to shift from oppression, static oppression, and sort of enforced basic repression to outright systemic mass violence and exclusion and deportation and so forth. And I think I'll just highlight these very quickly and then we can return if they're of interest to others. We've had cultural shifts, legal shifts, and other things that have started in some way to recognize the equivalent humanity of trans people as trans people. So we have things like allowing chosen names on school campuses, like my own university, legal protections for bathroom access and sports access and things like that. But also we started to see that even from a liberal, individualist, or libertarian perspective, the idea of gender self-determination is bound up fundamentally with what people on even a very conservative side would have to say are American values, right? What could be more American than deciding your own religion, your own gender, and so forth? And as we've seen these kinds of arguments make their way into legal and political circles, it's caused, in my opinion, a crisis. And that crisis is one where law, as much as it's abused in the Trump administration, law and culture are no longer enough to essentially suppress trans people and deny them their basic equality, basic humanity, and so forth. And that's where we see violence coming in. You see this quite a bit in other genocidal cases as well, where the population in question can no longer be suppressed, and the only option is, at least in intent, to eliminate them because they can no longer fit, and their presence points out a fundamental contradiction in the perpetrator society, a fundamental immorality in the perpetrator society. So I'll stop there, but hopefully we'll have a chance to talk more.
Thank you very much. And that brings us, of course, to the celebrated Susan Stryker, Dr. Susan Stryker.
Thank you. Thanks for the nice words, Henry. I was at your campus a couple of years ago, and I really really appreciated that visit. And it's really great to connect with Anne again. It's like Anne and I knew each other back in San Francisco in the early 1990s. I was part of Transgender Nation. I always really looked up to Anne's leadership and fierceness in doing trans activism, and of course everyone else here. Just like I followed your work as well, the Lemkin Institute. I cite in my most recent book on trans history. As was mentioned, I have a background in history. I used to be the director of the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco. I've done a lot of work on trans militancy, documenting the Compton's cafeteria riot. I write not just like, polysyllabic, academic-ese kinds of work, but I try to write for students and for general audiences as well. And so to put on my transgender historian hat, of course, as has been pointed out, it's never been easy being trans. If I look back at history of legislating against trans people in the United States, it really gets started in the 1840s, the first civic ordinances against cross-dressing. There's still, I think, needs to be a lot of research on why that was taking place when it was, but there was a wave of anti-cross-dressing legislation in the United States in the 1840s to 60s. I think it's really interesting that these are not national laws or state laws, they're municipal ordinances, that part of what's going on is we're seeing kind of new kinds of heterogeneous populations coming together, a lot of migrants, a lot of people who didn't know each other. Most of the cities where these laws were passed were like gold rush towns like San Francisco, or port cities, or intermodal transit hubs like Chicago. It's like, it has to do with population mixing. It has to do with strangers being with strangers. And it's in that setting that you start to see new kinds of legislation taking shape that targets trans people, among others. But, for the most part, trans people have been there has been the anti-cross-dressing laws. There is the fact that we're subjected to many kinds of nuisance laws, loitering, intent to cause a disturbance, inciting a riot, lewd and lascivious behavior. It's like these kinds of laws that are on the books that can be used at the discretion of the police just to sweep up people that they want to incarcerate or punish. That has been the major way that trans people have been targeted by the law, particularly in relationship to sex work. But we've also been psychiatrized. We've been considered to have mental illnesses and can be subjected to involuntary, incarceration, or just stigmatization as people who have, a mental illness. But I would say that it's mostly just the stigma, that has been the worst part of it, that trans lives are not considered good lives to live. They're not considered worthwhile lives. It's just weird and freaky, and like nobody cares. And that most of the problems that we have faced has been one of malignant neglect rather than really explicit targeting. And what I will say as a historian is that the wave of legislation we've seen in the United States since 2015, more than 1,000 bills passed in the US that are specifically targeting some aspect of trans life. That is new. It has been accelerating. It started accelerating in 2022. That's where I see a really sharp uptick. And over the past year, and I would say even over the past 6 months, it's like the pace of legislating against the possibility of trans life is rapidly accelerating. I would just say we have not yet seen, nobody's pulling the black SUV upside, my house and throwing me in the back and taking me to a detention center, or, throwing me out of a helicopter over the ocean. That has not started happening to trans people yet, but that the way of or just for being trans, but that I would say that what has happened is that there is a really concerted effort to make it impossible to you say you can be trans, you just can't do trans. It's like they're making the conditions of life impossible. And just there's two quotes I want to end on. There is a classic sentence in one of the very first gender critical anti-trans books by Janice Raymond from 1979. And she sort of famously said in 1979, the problem of transsexualism would best be served by morally mandating it out of existence. And that she said that she was not advocating violence against trans people. She was just saying like, oh, we should put them in conversion therapy. You should give them mandatory feminist consciousness raising. You basically would not allow people to do trans. And the connections between that kind of, some would say, progressive sort of feminist approach to protecting women by having a certain criticism of the gender concept of trans people. There's a direct line from that. It is not progressive in the least. There is a direct line to that, to some of the most horrific kinds of, genocidal statements that you hear people on the far right saying, notably Michael Knowles in 2023. Famously says it's like he says the transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. And when he was called out on that, saying like, isn't that genocidal? It's like, no. And he says, I don't know how you could have a genocide of transgender people, because genocide refers to genes. It's about genetics. It's about biology. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But he does say no one's calling to exterminate anyone, because the other problem with that statement is that transgender people is not a real ontological category. It is not a legitimate category of being. And that is where I do think we are experiencing genocidal conditions as trans people in the United States. It is the denial of our existence as trans people, whether or not our bodily, functions are being harmed, or we're being like, somebody's going to put a bullet in our head. Like, that isn't happening right now, but we are being denied existence as a category of people. Genocide.
Thank you very much. I'm not surprised that this happened, but we've sort of moved on to the first topic, which is, oops, I'm sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. We have actually moved on to the first topic, which, as described, is, excuse me, I'm having a little bit of a hard time. There we go. Is this actually a genocide? And you've already said a few things about that, but perhaps a little bit of sharpening the pencil is needed. That is, what is it that defines a genocide? And I know, Dr. von Joeden-Forgey, you have the 10, what was it? Not the 10 steps, but the 10 patterns of genocide. Perhaps that would be good to discuss a little bit here. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. You're still muted.
Sorry. So sorry, still doing that now after all these years. So we have developed 10 patterns of genocide because as a heuristic device to help people see genocide, because genocide can usually, unless you have documentation, right, of a declared intent or some clear indicators, which you don't always have. The way to identify genocide is through the behaviors and the patterns of behaviors of people in power. And so these 10 patterns, right, outline these different patterns based on historical cases. I am myself a historian, so Susan, we share that approach to things, and the patterns seem, like a good resource for people to understand genocides as they're occurring. And pattern 9 is destruction of identity, and you see this in a lot of your denial of identity. Pardon me, all of genocide is destruction of identity, but denial of identity, and you see this in many genocides. So, for example, most recently, when Putin invaded Ukraine, it was to be expected that there would be genocidal aspects to that war of aggression, right, to that invasion, because what he was saying and what he seems to believe, or at least the ideology that he promulgates, is that Ukrainianness is a fake identity, that Ukrainians are actually Russian. And they've been misled to think they're Ukrainian, you know, by these sort of merchants of evil who are the sort of Ukrainian political class. And so, you know, this war is very much about destroying Ukrainianness. And you see all sorts of symbolic forms of violence as well as actual forms of violence that indicate that show that demonstrate this genocidal intent. You also see, you know, massive transfer of children, Ukrainian children from Ukraine to Russia, where they're forcibly nationalized, right, made to learn Russian, made to forget the Ukrainian language, et cetera, et cetera. We've also seen denial of identity in the boarding school movement and all of the British settler colonies. There's denial of identity in Israel, right, the denial of the Palestinian identity. Palestinians don't exist. They're just Arabs. They're just this. They're just that, right? Now, of course, in all of this denial of identity, next to the denial of identity is a recognition also of the identity, because you're seeing the identity as a threat. And not only just a simple threat, but a cosmic threat, a threat that, you know, a threat that is going to somehow erode the ability or somehow deny the ability of the identity of the perpetrator to continue. And this, you know, this is a very potent mix of an ideology, of ideas within an ideology that leads to not just suppression of identity, but of course, criminalization of identity. We see that too, incitement of violence against identity, and a very necessary erasure project, because when you're actively denying an identity that clearly exists, in order to prove that that identity is wrong, doesn't exist, isn't real, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all these things, you need to erase it. You need to eliminate it as much as possible. But, you know, denial of identity need not necessarily take on a mass murder or mass containment form. What often happens is that in the process of denying an identity, things radicalize to the point that you end up incarcerating that identity, because people push back, because people insist on their identity, right? Because you develop within your own armed groups, right, a kind of hatred for that identity that tips the state over into massive forms of direct violence. So oftentimes what will happen is that if denial of identity is not, what would you say, is not countered effectively politically, it will self-radicalize into the other forms of persecution that we more often associate with genocide. But genocidaires, you know, one of the things we hope people get from our 10 patterns is that genocidaires are really, really creative in the ways that they eliminate people and the ways they find to eliminate people. And we are sort of always behind them, running to catch up with their innovations. So they're very hard to capture. And so I think we always have to be aware of patterns in order to see, you know, what are these new ways in which states are seeking to eliminate populations. And I think this denial of health, gender affirming health care, this is really interesting, right? And a really interesting form of genocide that we have to pay attention to. It's not mentioned in most of the books on genocide. Many genocide scholars don't write about it, don't think about it. But here we have the United States innovating very quickly a kind of new approach to genocide. And as I said, that can always radicalize into sort of more gender neutral mass murder types of genocide.
Thank you very much. I'd like to let people know that we will have a little bit of time for questions and comments after this short topic. So do send those in through Twitch, and Jenny, who is managing the call, will be able to pass them on to us. Before we get to that, though, I was wondering, Henry, if you have anything to add. Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I don't want to stand in the front of anybody else, but Elisa's comments are very important. I think there are a few other things we can add to them that I think that are complementary. One is, one of the problems of the way that in the United States the discourse on genocide goes, and we can see this again and again in scholarship as well as policy papers, is genocide is somebody else's problem. we don't commit genocide. It's not part of our culture. It's not something we ever do. The reality, of course, is quite different. Internally and externally, I would argue that the United States, like many, many other countries, don't get me wrong, it's not the US is somehow exceptional in this way. Um, I, I will say has had a pretty constant history of genocide in some way. There are internal groups that have been targeted historically and to the present, and there are external groups as well. Whether you look at indigenous Americans, sort of both internally and externally throughout a long history. The Vietnam War. I mean, you know, again, Guatemala, Bangladesh, and so on and so forth outside the country, but also inside the country as we look at, say, lynching as an aftermath effect of the freedom of slaves and the sort of potential for a change in the US hierarchy. Lynching and other violence, mass violence, systemic violence against African Americans becomes more prevalent, and so on and so forth. So I think the first thing we have to recognize is we need to change our imaginary to realize, presumably if you've experienced anti-trans violence, you understand the day-to-day pressure and so forth. It doesn't take a lot to understand the potential for genocide. But for people, like many people in the United States, for whom that's invisible, it seems like a big stretch to think, oh, we're not, you know, how are we committing genocide? How is that a potential? But it really is. And I think there are small, how do I want to say this, or markers that make this, that are sort of red flags along the lines of what Elisa was saying, but that are very concrete. So for instance, when we look at one of the methods of genocide, which is to impose conditions that result in death. Often people interpret that as forcibly starving people, exposing them to horrible climate conditions. But it can be other ways as well. The threat of rape that results in suicide, which is prevalent in, or has been prevalent in many cases of genocide, for instance, as an example. And so if we think of the way in which hostility, violence, threats, and also that suppression of basic identity, basic human self that Elisa was talking about, actually does increase, and we know this in various ways, does increase the suicide rate among populations. And that to me is a marker of genocidal killing. That's a way to effectively destroy a population. Genocide is not only about killing, but this is one place where that aspect of it becomes very important. One of the other things we can see that's very common and is another type of or another method of genocide is the forcible transfer of children from one identity to another. And we can see this in a very, very clear way in the anti-trans movement on all the levels that it's operating, right? Social pressure and things like that to try to force people, as Susan was saying, even, you know, Janice Raymond, people like that, who are advocating this forced assimilation into an identity that a person is specifically identifying as not their identity, has specifically chosen a different identity. And that is a form of genocidal destruction. When someone is forced to assimilate, you have destroyed an essence, a part of them that is a function of genocide. So I think this is important for us to stretch the imagination of people who don't see this on an everyday basis in the United States, because that's the only way, with what I think is an honest and a courageous look at what the United States is doing to trans people right now, that we have a chance to intervene and in a serious way to change the path that we're on. So I'll stop there, but thank you for the chance to.
Well, thank you very much. We are running, first of all, I hate to say this because I wish it could go on forever. We are running a little bit behind, and as it happens, we're not being, there aren't people clawing with questions or comments. So we'll save those until the end, and instead, now we can move on to the second question. 1 second. Which is, how long do we have and what are my options, speaking specifically as a trans person? And for that, I'd like to move to Anne, who's been working most closely with that question.
Okay. How long do we have? That honestly was the genesis of tonight's
So
discussion.
Originally, we would be switching to questions at 46 past the hour, which is 6 minutes from now. However, as I say, I don't think that people are clawing for questions, and what you have to say is very important, so don't worry too much about that. And also,
okay.
we worked in some extra time at the end.
I'm going to talk over you because you're. I think I should have a chance to talk. So how long do we have in 1 year prior to Trump's re-election, or second election? Trans Rescue set out a PR plan that would guide trans Americans to get out of the United States by the time of the 2024 election. We discovered that trans people were just simply not ready for that, and so we didn't get a lot of uptake. What we did do is get most trans Americans to get a passport, and we were doing surveys. During that time, the number of trans Americans who had a passport went from about 33% to over 75%. The highest we measured it was 81. But how soon? Well, last October, we decided to start changing our advice from you should make a business-like an organized attempt or a plan to get out and then execute that plan to advising trans Americans that the best course was to physically leave the United States and then to figure out on a tourist passport or however, and then to make and then to organize a way to stay out once you are outside. Our reason for doing that is that we now almost on an almost weekly basis see threats against the ability of trans people to leave the United States. We're very concerned about what's called containment. The idea that prior to that as part of genocide, you want to control the perpetrator wants to control the victims and prevent them from leaving. And of course, Trump has famously is now making it hard for trans people to obtain a passport. So this is the basic travel document. So how soon? Our answer has been get the hell out. But that's we're also very, very much aware that it takes a long time to get out. I was a relatively privileged person. I was a software engineer, but yet as a kind of person who makes things, I was half owner of a sort of hobby and sort of business private engineering works. And so I was very reluctant to leave that all behind. My possessions went to something like 40 tons to something that fit in a carry-on and a check bag. When I fled in 2018. But it took a couple of years. I was partially prompted in my decision by my business partner going through a divorce. But people have lives, and that's no easier for a 21-year-old trans woman who's working in a grocery store. It's not easy if you're in that situation to contemplate picking up and moving abroad. So that's my take on when.
Thank you. And by the way, we have about 15 minutes left, and rather than having a formal opening for questions and then overrun time and all that sort of thing, I'd like to open it up for a freer discussion among the four of you, if that's okay. But to get back to what you said, Anne, talking about the difficulty of leaving, there are the two things. One is the practical difficulty, and then there's the psychological difficulty. And perhaps that's something that all of you could talk about. What are you leaving behind? What are you gaining? The risk versus reward calculation of it.
Well, I'll just go ahead and jump in now on that and keep my remarks brief. Like the question of when is it time to leave? It's like it's already too late, and like there's still time at some. I think, some of it has to do with your personal risk assessment. I think some of it has to do with your external circumstances. Like I said, there have been two moments in the last year where I have felt genuine fear. One of them was after the Charlie Kirk assassination, when some of the rhetoric that was coming out of the government, some of the things that they were saying that they were going to do, people that they said that they were going to go after. It's like, I am a well-known spreader of the woke mind virus, who is fueling that academia to activism pipeline. It's like I get grant funding from some of those suspect Antifa funding organizations. It's just like, and when the government was saying like, we're going to start infiltrating those organizations, we're going to deem people terrorists, we're going to start freezing assets, I thought, okay, like maybe it's time to go. And it seemed like, there's something that's very uneven about the way these things unfold. It's like they make a lot of noise and then like they back off and you think maybe it's okay. And then they do the thing that they said that they were going to do, maybe not quite the way that you thought. And it really keeps you off balance. Just in my own life, I have made the decision that as long as I feel like my life isn't immediately in danger or my freedom isn't immediately in danger, I do want to stay in the US because I think there's work to do here. There's a very strong emotional anchor. I think if it was just me, it's like I would probably go, but my partner is here and, we just had a grandbaby and, it's just like, it feels like the risk calculus is not yet at the place where I'm going like, yeah, I don't want to have these people in my life anymore. It's like I'm just going to leave everything, grab that, go sack and go. But I have taken a lot of precautions. It's like I did immediately. It's like day after the election, I updated my passport, even though it still had several years left on it, because I wanted to have as many years on it as possible. I made sure I had access to money outside the United States. I made sure that I had a first place to go if I needed to run. Because I have been crossing borders in the last 18 months, it's like I have a lawyer who has a writ of habeas corpus where they just need to fill in the details on it. I only fly in and out of the country through San Francisco Airport, International Airport, because this is kind of where my lawyer lives, and they know the judges here. If I get detained, it makes it easier. I have a burner device. I have my lawyer on speed dial. It's like I take precautions. I wipe devices when I'm crossing the border. And it's a real pain in the ass to go through all of these things. And sometimes I think, oh, like, why am I even doing this? It's like, it hasn't gotten that bad yet. But it's like, it's like it could be that bad the next time you go to the airport. So you just really don't know. And now they've got ICE agents in airports in the US. So who the hell knows where that's going? But I think, to second what Anne was saying, it's like, if you can go and there's like not a big thing holding you back, it's like, by all means, it's like, be somewhere else. I probably have a dozen people in my life who've made the decision to leave. Many of them trans, but some of them not. Some of them just like not feeling like this is going in a good direction here in the United States, and that they want to be somewhere else. So, yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in? We do have a question waiting, but if anyone else wants to jump in, please do.
Yeah, I should say, and Susan, you're honestly a relatively privileged person. You already travel internationally and so on. I speak to many people. We hold office hours, drop-in consultation every Saturday evening, Saturday midday in the U.S. And and oftentimes we have people who say, I've never flown on a plane before. I'm from a working class family. My biological brother told me that he had never been on a plane, and I was rather surprised. I fly around the world without thinking about it, but that's very class dependent. And we do, and you spoke about emotional blocks. For many of our passengers, for the people who come to us, part of it is just simply fear of the unknown. Again, think of my brother, who the big adventure of his life was that he once drove from Kansas up to the state of Washington. And if that's your model of being outside of your comfort zone, then the idea of packing up and moving to the Philippines permanently is very, very daunting.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Henry. It looks like
no. I don't mean to throw. I mean, these are very important things. I was just going to add that, again, this is a case where the way that we typically think of things in our sort of normal discussions of issues like this is as if people are just sort of leaving, or they're just moving somewhere. They're becoming refugees. And while wealth does matter, or privilege, some relative privilege does matter, they are displaced people. If you have to leave your home under threat of violence and deep discrimination, you are part of the tens of millions of refugees around the world. And in some cases, many cases, in fact, that means you are going to be in a very difficult economic, political, social, and cultural position after you move. It's not like you leave and suddenly things are good. And so that's part of the pain of this. There's no easy way to solve this problem. Trans rescue is saving lives, absolutely, but it's not like there's a paradise that they're transporting everybody to easily either. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind. We need prevention as much as rescue.
I think, Henry, that's really important. One thing Anne and I have discussed is finding ways to chip away at sort of like allied countries' perception of the United States as a safe country for trans people, so that trans people don't qualify as refugees because they're not believed to face persecution in the United States. Now, that is eroding under the weight of what everybody has been talking about. So Susan mentioned, right, this sort of astronomical increase in the number of bills and the intensity of the hostility to trans people in the United States, and that is having an impact on the way that Canada and the European Union and other places see the United States for trans folks. So one of the things that Anne and I have talked about, and I think we all need to work together to achieve, right, is clear pathways, established pathways, established by foreign countries for trans people to leave and find security elsewhere. Now, there are a bunch of different legal and policy mechanisms that countries that would be receiving countries or host countries, right, countries of rescue could use. But one of the things we really need to impress upon the outside world, right, and this goes to something you mentioned earlier, Henry, which is that people don't see the United, even though the United States was founded on genocide and it has committed, multiple genocides over its 250 years of existence, and continues to, pursue genocidal patterns against African Americans, Native Americans, et cetera, et cetera. Despite all of that, we're seen as like the oldest democracy, right? We're not seen as a state that sort of commits active genocide nowadays. And this is a problem for trans folks in particular in the US, which is that the outside world doesn't understand what's happening here, and the extremity of the situation. I think that's what we need to do. We need to organize to make that clear to outside countries and give them the opportunity to really do something right, which is, to offer people a safe haven and a legal means, right, of finding that safe haven and helping them to get out of the United States. Because so many trans folks really don't have extra income. Like a lot of other Americans, they don't have disposable income. They live paycheck to paycheck. And so even I myself, I'm wondering, how would I, now that I'm no longer a professional, how would I even, what would I do, if I go to Canada or Philippines or anywhere? Like, I would run out of money so quickly, right? So this is, I think this is how we have to be thinking. Many of, like we know from the Holocaust, many of the folks who were able to get out and survive had means. And they had recognition, name recognition, right? Or they were scholars or scientists, and they were seen to contribute something to the wider society. But, even though that's kind of an elitist way of thinking, it's still very predominant. And so, yeah, what do we do about folks? And you mentioned people who work at grocery stores, right? Like my son did. What do we do, right, about folks, right, whose pathway may not be made so easy because of their class background, for example. And then, of course, there are issues of race that are really, really important as well in terms of finding a safe haven in Europe, for example. I think if we can work on that, that's a form of prevention. Like, we got to fight here at home against what's going on, but we also got to help people get out. And
I must say, yeah, a lot of our is like young adults, and frequently they're I'm
sorry, and you're freezing up a bit. Oh,
to people. No.
I hate to say it, Anne, but you froze up a bit there, and you might be frozen now. If you wouldn't mind just repeating that, and hopefully we'll get you on, and if not, we'll move on. Oh, I think she's frozen. And actually, I want to. Oh, Susan, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, just maybe I could jump in quickly while we're waiting. Oh, Anne seems to be back. So.
Yes, please, Anne, if you could return.
I'm sorry. I actually had finished my statement. To reiterate, I was just saying that the number of times when I end up giving not specifically how to get out advice, as much as just how to survive as a young person in the United States advice. Sometimes, honestly, advice that I'm rather ill-equipped to give because I am 67 and I have a career. But I spend a lot of time just dispensing basic how to survive in America.
Oop, I'm afraid that you got cut off again there, but you got your main message through. Hopefully you can hear this. By the way, technically we said we would be going for an hour, and it's now an hour. We have 4 questions in the waiting room. I don't get the sense that anybody has the appetite to cut it off here, but I do understand if anybody has to take off. So with your permission, I suggest that we just continue and can let it continue to be free-flowing. But I feel so bad about Anne having to drop out there. So, but she did get across what she wanted to say. With your permission, good, Anne is back. With your permission, I could ask one of the questions now, or if you'd like to continue this discussion in the way that it is, that's also fine. And Anne, I don't know if you heard that, but I'm proposing that we just continue, even though the hour is ostensibly up. There is one thing that I want to do before we do that, however, which is to make sure that everybody has the, oops, wrong thing, sorry, which is to make sure that everybody has TransRescue's website information. And there we are. There's a QR code right there, but it very simply goes to transrescue.org. And although we don't have enough time to talk about all the things that TransRescue has done, is doing, and will do, the website is quite complete. So I do hope that those of you who are unfamiliar with it will get familiar with it, and you'll find many resources there that I'm sure will be useful to you. So having said that, if you don't mind, I would like to move on to the first of the questions, which is, does 3 red flags inevitably lead to active genocide from a historical perspective? And I assume that they're talking about the Lemkin Institute's red flags. So I'll turn it to you, Dr. von Joeden-Forgey.
Hi, yeah, I'll just quickly answer that by saying nothing's ever inevitable, right? As a state consolidates its power more and more, so the more dictatorial powers, authoritarian powers that Trump is able to claim, and the more totalizing they are across all 50 states, the more likely, right, 3 red flag alerts are to sort of culminate in an active genocide alert, meaning the more likely a genocidal process is to lead to kind of much more intensive forms of active physical genocide, such as mass containment, mass murder. But we don't see that yet, right? And so it's never inevitable. The state could collapse under its own, contradictions. That's unusual. There could be effective political pushback. Maybe, people talk about 2026 elections. The Lemkin Institute's not certain that they will happen. We're not, bully about that. We're pretty sure they're not going to be free and fair. And we don't really know what the consequence of some, serious Democratic wins would be. And so there's, the more crimes that a leadership commits while they're in office, the less likely they are to leave. And so in that way, we're in very bad straits in the United States, because these folks are committing serious crimes against humanity while we're speaking, and they don't want to be out of power at all, apart from the fact that they're making money hand over fist through all of this. So no, it's not inevitable. I'll just say that, and we got to fight to make sure it doesn't happen. But things can change very quickly, and so we always have to know it's there. That possibility is right there, and we have to make decisions with that in mind. Susan was going to say something, I think, before we broke to questions, and I really want to hear what she was going to say, and probably it'll tie into this.
Yeah, it was just while Anne was frozen up, I thought, here's some statistics to put things in perspective, thinking about leaving the U.S. So 2 years ago, I was a talking head in a documentary about the plight of trans kids in the U.S. And I in that film, I just saw for the first time a couple of weeks ago, it's like I used the statistic that was current at the time, which was that it looked like there were about 100,000 trans people in the United States who had moved from considered as place they considered unsafe to a place they considered safe, red state to blue state, so to speak. When I was finishing up revisions to my latest edition of my trans history book last year, that number was at 200,000. This year, a couple of weeks ago, looking at the same statistics, is now about 400,000 people. There's almost 500,000 people in the United States who have already become political refugees within the United States because they are trans. And if some of these federal level laws pass, it's like that is the scale of people who will be looking to leave. If that rate of progression continues at that rate, it's like there could be like 1 million people in a year who are looking to get out of the United States because it is not safe to be trans here. And that is just I keep thinking about the famous poem by Warsan Shire, no one leaves home until home is the mouth of a shark. It's like no one leaves home until home is a voice in your ear saying, run now, go. It's just like, I don't know what I have become. And like that sense of we don't know what the United States has become really sits with me. I mean, as we have all been saying tonight, it's like the United States is predicated on 2 genocides and it has committed so many more, but there is still that sense of, for many of us, a kind of dual state, like there is the normative state and then then there's the prerogative state. And that sense of the prerogative state where those in power can just declare the state of emergency and do whatever the hell they're going to do. I think it's just slapping so many people upside the head right now, but it is real and it is happening.
If I may ask, Susan, what is the source, and not to put you on the spot, but what is the source of that figure of 100,000, 200,000?
I can go look it up. It's like, I think I probably got it somewhere from Aaron in the Morning, Aaron Reed. I could look, but she was citing something. I think a movement advancement project was putting a lot of these statistics out. Wasn't necessarily expecting I was going to say that on this talk tonight, but I can look up the sources on that and I can email them to you. But yeah, it just struck me 100,000, 200,000, 400,000 in the space of 2 years.
Yes, thank you. We do have another question, and actually it kind of ties into that first one. I sort of have to correct something in the question. The full question is, based on the current climate, do you think physical violence is more likely from the state level or from within local communities, especially in red states? And the part that I think maybe needs a bit of addressing is the physical violence part, because I think what I've gotten from both Dr. Theriault and Dr. von Joeden-Forgey is that physical violence is not necessarily the red line. But getting back to the original question, is it more likely from the state level or local communities, or for that matter, national?
I'll throw something out about the specificity of the culture and political and economic system in which genocide occurs. And it's one of the things I think Elisa's work with the Lemkin Institute is very important in highlighting different kinds of genocide so that you can actually see them, because we tend to look at the Holocaust and only maybe we get to gypsies. We certainly don't get to LGBTQIA plus people in the Holocaust. We don't get to other populations. But that's one pattern. And people are always saying, well, it doesn't look like that, therefore it's not genocide. The reality is the United States has a particular culture. We have a particular economic system and political system. And I think it's dangerous to think that democracy itself prevents genocide, or that erosion of democracy is the only way to get to genocide, because we have had democratized genocide. Democracies have a lot of problems, and particularly, I would say, in the history of the US, there's always been at least one major outgroup that helps organize the sense of majority rule and cohesion and so forth. And I think we're seeing that very much today with trans people. And I would add that the United States, I don't think it's an either or state, federal government, more local government, or on the ground sort of quasi private actors. What we've seen historically is that the United States always has all three of those in operation, where other cases might be very top down. Some cases might be bottom up. The United States does a great job of integrating that. And I think part of what we do very effectively, and I don't mean this as praise, obviously, but as a historical fact, is we're very good at privatizing genocide. We're very good at pushing genocide to the local level, because we do have a sense where we promote autonomy. We're seeing that under the Trump administration. We saw it in Charlottesville under the first Trump reign, where average people on the ground take up an ideology that's reinforced at the federal level, but act with a kind of autonomy that is actually beyond the effectiveness of what a top-down model could achieve. And I think that's part of the danger here, is that we have a permissibility of anti-trans violence that's endemic in the United States. And so it's potentially anywhere. And by the way, the blue state, red state thing, I live in Massachusetts. Let me tell you, that has some impact, but there are plenty of places in Massachusetts where friends of mine are afraid to go, and for very good reason. And so I think that's one danger we have to look at, is the unity of the diverse ways we operate with violence in our country.
Thank you very much. There are two questions waiting, and they actually deal with the same thing. So I'm going to read both of them out, and then we can take them as you like. The first is, I'm curious what this means for trans people who are under even more state scrutiny, like trans people who are incarcerated or on probation or parole. Are there different levels or patterns of genocide based on the degree of state control over a population? And what may we expect on this front? And then the other question is, the perspective I've largely seen around me as a trans American is weary resignation to genocide based on poverty and disability limiting our options for another country. What would you say to those people? And I group these two together because it really has to do with exactly as Anne and Susan said about being privileged. What hopes are there for those who are not in such a situation? Yes, Anne.
Yeah, let me address that because it comes up all the time. We hear from people all the time that they are under the control, that they are trapped in the system of control because they are on disability. And I would like to say there are restrictions on what you can do on SSDI. There are certainly restrictions on what you can do if you're on SSI, but if you're on SSDI, you should come to our office hours, and there are still options for leaving. So, I think it's important not that people not lose hope, but yes, there are a tremendous number of people under the state control. I'm also surprised by the level of criminalization. I speak to many people who are on parole, and it's very easy to become enmeshed in the incarceration system as a trans person. But what will happen? People will die. That's what will happen. We are trying to help people get out. I'm also hearing poverty, and I would say to those of you who have few resources and are trying to get out, talk to us. we can't. I believe that if you are not under the state's control, that almost every person can get out, regardless of how much money you have. And I am not talking totally across class. I have also been homeless.
Yeah, to just jump in on that, you already see any population that is institutionalized, and whether that's in the military, whether it's in prisons, where it's in old folks' homes, where it's like are far more susceptible to control. And if you look at you see what's happened with military service, it's just like trans people are just excluded from that. People being denied veterans benefits because they're trans. People in prisons right now being forcibly detransitioned, being taken off medicines, being not just housed in the wrong facility, but being subjected to coercive behavioral modification. It's just like, it is really horrendous. And the percentage of trans people who are incarcerated relative to the general population, I think is something like 3 times as high. A horrific statistic that I just refreshed myself on recently is that almost 50% of Black trans people have been convicted of a crime and have served time. It's like the incarceration system is one of the most punitive mechanisms for operating on trans people's lives already. It has already been that. It's really bad in the United States. I think we have like 5% of the world population and 25% of the incarcerated population worldwide. So the carceral system is one of the most horrible forms of violence. But I heard Anne say something about like getting people together to not like give them a sense of not losing hope. I think that is actually tremendously important. Henry, you were saying states we're really good at privatizing genocide in the U.S. It's like, I think we're also really good at individualizing it. I mean, not to go all jargony, but like within neoliberalism as an economic system, this idea that the consumer citizen is increasingly made responsible for making the right choices in a marketplace of ideas, and maximizing this, or just being a rational consumer, as if we all have a level playing field that we're starting from and can freely choose one thing or another. That sense of, well, it's like, you're the one who chose to smoke cigarettes, so we're not gonna pay for your lung cancer treatment. The insurance company says that's your fault. Well, there's a way that I think you look at the rates of suicidality among trans people, which is about 10 times higher than the general population, and that sense of you're facing something hopeless and life is becoming even harder under this increasing genocidal regime. And if people decide it's just too much, that like they need to go, and they go, is that genocide, or is that just mentally ill people committing them, killing themselves? It's like the genocide is being individualized through a neoliberal logic, and it's like I think we have to like come together as a community of trans people and people who care about it, as a way of just like literally like giving people hope is a thing that is like the first step to resisting self-deciding, and we have to, and then we have to build up community resources. We have to have mutual aid. We have to do what other groups who are being targeted for genocide have done, which is like, you start migrations, you pool money, you like pay money to get people out, you create places for people to land. We really need to be doing that. I mean, that's the work that Anne and Trans Rescue are already doing, and we need more of that.
Can I just jump in to follow those incredibly important remarks from Susan? And we have to think that in cases, each case of genocide has some differences from others. And as Elisa was saying, and I've also worked on in the past, perpetrators are innovative, but also who is targeted is different. And one of the things when you're targeting trans people that's different from Gaza, Armenian Artsakh, the Rohingya, and so forth, is that the population is not geographically concentrated and identifiable in that way, right? So people from a particular region get identified as being targeted by this violence. It's systemic violence across the entire US. And Susan's exactly right. It looks often like individualized violence that's not part of a systematic destruction of a population or attack on the population. And I think hopefully one thing that's coming out of tonight is that we're calling attention to the unified nature of what's happening. That this is not a bunch of individual kind of fringe acts. This is part of as Susan I think was saying as well, a structural process that we are seeing. The challenges are really big in that way because people don't necessarily already come from communities, right? So they might, you were talking about how isolated people might be who become refugees, right? They don't even have a community to restore, let alone, to rely on when they end up somewhere. They don't have ready allies, people that they can work with. Again, Trans Rescue can do a lot to help with that, but people are very cut off, and that's not always the case in genocide. It makes it that kind of attack, the kind of push to suicide and things like that, easier in this realm and more effective. So thank you, Susan, for those comments. They're really helpful.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in too and follow up on that. This is really an important discussion. And suicide, the issue of suicide as a form of genocide or as a part of a genocidal process is very common. Many people who are facing genocide from threatened communities all over the world throughout history have committed suicide in the face of that threat. And then suicide happens all along the sort of, what would you say, physical genocidal process, and then afterwards as well. And so it's something we really have to focus on if we're trying to prevent genocide or ameliorate its consequences, is working to help people thrive even in the worst of circumstances, to survive and thrive. And that is the resistance to survive and thrive. One thing we do know from genocides, even those that become institutionalized structurally after kind of a maelstrom of physical violence. So, for example, the structural genocides against African Americans and Native Americans in the United States, it's ongoing today, right, are the results of these mass atrocities, physical genocide against Native Americans and this genocidal form of chattel slavery against African Americans. But those processes do end, right? The leadership that leads these things, they die, right? These states come to an end. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes less long. But the monsters are not permanent, right? But the value of life is permanent. And so the value of everyone's life is permanent. And I think that's something we need to constantly reassert and say that you need to thrive and survive. And I think it's so important to underscore what Anne is doing. Anne is not going to let anyone fall through the cracks if she can do something about it, And at Lemkin Institute, that's also our purpose, is never to leave somebody behind, right? Always to fight for the ability of people to survive and thrive. So one thing I do suggest to folks in the trans community is to reach out to other communities that are currently facing genocide in the US and elsewhere, and to communities that have historically faced genocide. Right now, transphobia, it's everywhere, but it helps so much to make community with people from other communities that have suffered similarly in the past or are suffering similarly now. You can share knowledge, you can share resources, and you can be a affirmed, right, in your own identity and its value, even in the face of insane hunting.
You know, yeah, I would suggest that people need practical help.
And actually, that's a very good segue that I was hoping to make anyway, and because a lot of what's come up in this last couple of questions is, what can I do right now, especially if I'm disadvantaged? And you mentioned office hours. You mentioned get in touch with us. Could you go into the details specifically?
Sure. Let me put in the plug for office hours. We hold an open Google Meet call every Saturday it's midday in the United States time, and there's a link. If there's a page you can get to from our homepage, it says if you need help getting out of the United States, we encourage you all to come. We'd love to see more of you there. You don't have to have a plan, and you don't have to be totally convinced that you need to leave to come. It's just a place to be if you're thinking about leaving the U.S. And we'd love to see you there. And I'm also going to put in the plug that the work we do is expensive. You can do many things without money, but we do have a lot of trans people in places far more dangerous than the United States, and getting them out requires airline tickets, and so we're always short funds.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to switch to the Trans Rescue website just to walk people through, because I think, just having that actually sometimes will let people know, oh yes, that's the resource. So I assume you all can see that. And here's the Getting Out of the USA section. And if we go up to the top, you can see there's a donate button right there. Is there anything else, Anne, that you think we should go to right now that you'd like people to see? I'm afraid I can't hear you.
No, but can I end on a hopeful note?
Okay. By the way, there are questions, and I have to apologize to the people who we weren't able to get to. But this does seem like a good point to stop. So please take us out, as they say.
All right. So about a year ago, we after a long, hard journey, we managed to extract a trans woman in her 20s from Kenya, and she's now in a safe country. And she has settled down, and she contacted us. And tomorrow we're having a brief meeting because she wanted our advice. She's considering having a small home built. It's a very small building, but she's building a house.
Wonderful. And actually, in the light of hope, oh yes, I'm sorry, was there something? Okay. Just continuing with the thread of hope, I was fairly impressed, remarkably impressed, when you told me how many people you've helped and how much has already been done. So this is a good brag time, if you'd care to, Anne, about what Trans Rescue has done.
Okay. We know that we have individually helped about 200 people flee from countries that are in our category of dangerous countries. We've probably helped thousands of trans Americans, I know that discussions in the trans community often include references to, well, Trans Rescue says this. So I know we're getting some penetration there. We will never know exactly how many people we saved. But yeah, we're at about 200 as far as doing the kind of very high touch, dangerous extractions that we do from places like Saudi Arabia and Yemen, including,
that is
including, by the way, we were the biggest actor on the ground during the Uganda genocide, or the early days. It's still ongoing, but in the early days, after the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act in 2023, I was in East Africa, and we were working on the ground, and we got lots of people out. We literally were hiring buses.
Thank you. Truly, truly remarkable. It really is. And once again, I would like to share the information, which is, oops, there we go. Transrescue.org. Everything is there. And with nothing else that needs to be said, I'd like to thank you all very much for coming. And this, by the way, is very likely the first in a series of similar webinars. I see Anne shaking her head yes, so I can say that. And once again, thanks to everybody. And if you have further questions, transrescue.org stands ready to help you. Have a good day.
Thank you all. Thank you. It was a real honor.
And we're out. Yay.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
I'm back. Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right. Well, Anne, good to see you again. Henry, lovely to spend some time with you.
So nice. So honored.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah. And
with you.
Jenny.
And Anne, thank you.
Thanks. And Tom, everyone. And I'll shoot a note to, I guess. So, all right. I'm about.
All right. Please take care.
Listen, if you have academics, I know you're working with academics to get them out. If you have people, like, point them toward, point them toward office hours.
Yeah, I have. I drop, Trans Rescue name all the time.
Ruby.
Yeah, so we'll keep talking, because I don't think it's going to get better quick.
Okay, and if you get to another one, like, you must come, because my own ability to travel has become restricted. I'm wanted in too many places.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm still skirting under the radar screen right now. Listen, it was so nice.
Yeah, the last count, I was wanted in about 8 or 12 faces.
Yeah.
I'm like a fangirl, Susan, so yeah, it was really great. It was lovely.
Well, likewise. So really appreciate the work that you're doing. Let's not be strangers, okay?
Absolutely.
I think our work is unfortunately coming together. All right. And so, Anne, thanks again.
I just wanted to drop in and say sorry. I realized I got off so fast, so I'm so sorry. So that's why I'm coming back in. But I'll let you all talk, and I'll get lost.
Cool. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.